Strata Unscripted is back. This week, I'm joined not only by Katharine, but also Sean Michaels of Obsidian Property Management. Welcome.
Hi, Tom.
Very nice to have you both here. Katharine, take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really excited to have Shawn Michaels on our call today. And to be clear, it is Shawn Michaels' full name, as opposed to the other half of his brokerage, Celeste, his wonderful wife. It's always Shawn Michaels' full name and Celeste, like Cher. Just a little fun tidbit. I love that about them. We did try to get Celeste to come on the podcast, but she abjectly refused. So I will work on her, and we will have her on here eventually. Yeah, I'd love to just dive in. Tell us a little bit about you. Why'd you start Obsidian? What was that? What was the instigator of that choice?
So the honest truth about starting Obsidian was, well, there was a couple things. One, I saw there was a sort of intrinsic flaw in the way things were being done with strata management in general in my brief career with other brokerages. But the real truth is that I work really well with others, but not for others. And so it just made a lot more sense for me to be in charge and fix the problems that I was seeing at this level instead of arguing with people about not fixing the problems. So here I am.
Yeah. You have an interesting brokerage model too, in that you don't chase after the same 10% of the big buildings in town that all the major brokerages will chase after.
Yeah.
You go after the majority, to be clear, of strata corporations are not those ones. You go after them. What kind of led to that, and why is that the niche that you've gone for?
Well, it's not that we don't. I don't chase anybody. I let them come to me first of all. But two, the larger buildings are great, and if they were to come to Obsidian, we're more than happy to take care of them. Our model is flexible to be able to handle any size of strata. Being that we work on retained hours, it just seems that we've sort of fell into helping the smaller stratas because we're so customizable and flexible as to how we can assist, that there was a niche that just sort of appeared. It was somewhat deliberate. I've always wanted to help all levels of strata. I've always thought that it's important that all sizes of strata get professional assistance, because the Strata Property Act is just as complicated no matter what size you are. And many years ago at this point, I did some quick calculations because I saw some numbers as to how many strata units there were in the province and how many strata corporations there are in the province. I did a quick average, which came out to 22 units per strata was the average at the time, and 22 unit stratas don't get management companies, or at least they have trouble getting them because of the minimums that people charge. And I'm like, well, if half the stratas are 22 units or less, how do we serve these communities and make it feasible for everybody and beneficial for everybody to do so? And hence we came out with the model that we came out with, which really was just me copying other professions like lawyers and accountants who do retained hours. It's not like I reinvented the wheel. It's just I applied something from a different profession to what we do as strata managers.
I think it makes a lot of sense. In particular too, I think it's a really interesting model because they're coming to you because they want to work with you specifically. Being that a lot of them are smaller ones that you're seeing, how often are you seeing ones that were previously self-managed?
Not as often as I would have thought. What I'm finding is that a lot of the smaller stratas that are coming our way have been previously managed. There's a few that were self-managed. Usually the self-managed stratas make the decision to get a manager when something has gone horribly wrong.
And that's kind of my next question. That was my question that I was going to get to there.
So they everything is fine until it's not, right?
Yes.
In strata. And so with the self-managed stratas, they tend to truck along just fine until someone gets out of line or there's a disagreement, and personalities get involved, or someone leaves. Usually there's one very active strata member in these smaller communities who's willing to do a lot of the work and take care of all of the, back end of what a strata corporation requires. And if they decide to move or leave the strata corporation, the rest of the owners have no interest in doing those things, and they find themselves in a bit of a pickle, right? And
You're going to
so,
see that a lot with the retirees, because a lot of them are like, they have specifically said, look, now that I'm retired and I've done this for a few years, I want to actually spend time with my grandkids, or, hey, my health is declining rapidly because of my job on Strata, and I don't want to do this anymore. That has been said to me multiple times.
There's that, right? And then the other side is then there's also the troublesome owners that tend to occur, and whether they're litigious or they're just a nuisance or they're difficult to get along with in some way, shape, or form, tends to cause people to want to offload that onto someone who has the time and the knowledge to do that, right? So that's when we generally see the self-managed stratas coming our way. Most of the stratas that come our way are stratas that have been they've been in portfolios with management companies, but they get that feeling that they're not that they're so much unwanted, but they're kind of not a priority, right?
Well, they aren't. I'll be honest, from the inside of large brokerages, which was the majority of my career experience, straight up, they are training buildings, and they're treated that way. And it's not a great experience for either the strata manager or the council, I'll be honest, because it's the expectations are there, but they're unsaid in those places, it feels like, a lot of the time. And maybe just getting on the same page and being under the understanding of where you are as a priority would make a difference in a lot of these cases.
And that's, and that becomes the problem, because not only does that impact the operation of the strata corporation, which ultimately sort of takes away from what we're supposed to be doing as strata managers, which is protecting the public and getting that done. But it also gives a bad reputation to strata managers, because then all these people that live in these small stratas that are being managed aren't getting the greatest service, and everyone just thinks that strata managers are crap. Sorry, but that's kind of what happens. And
you see it in the Facebook threads, like you can see those comments, like, we're on our fourth manager this year,
and it hurts.
Unit strata, and we're on our fifth manager, fourth manager, fifth manager.
Yeah, and it hurts me, right? Because I really do care about strata management. I want to see us move into being one of those respected professions that are out there, and it should be. The amount of knowledge and work we have to put into doing strata management is quite extensive if you're doing it correctly. But the smaller stratas deserve that too, right? But it needs to scale, and the minimum charges and the fixed price service model just doesn't scale to be able to take care of those smaller stratas, in my opinion. That's my opinion, and I haven't seen it work yet, really, and it's just costing everybody money, reputation, and it's not a good relationship, right? So,
well, no, and it's not, that kind of model and system doesn't really keep the public safe, because the other thing that happens in those stratas coming from self-managed or from other places to you is because something terrible has happened, because they weren't governing things or weren't maintaining things. And that kind of brings me to the other point I wanted to kind of get your insight on, is that Obsidian is one of the court-appointed administrative brokerages, which is a special thing that has to be appointed, and you have to be recommended through legal professionals in the industry and all sorts of criteria. But there's a really big disconnect I find on the ground of strata owners that are like, oh, how do we get a court-ordered, court-appointed administrator? And they're like, well, we have the money for it, but we just can't function together. How do we get that? And the answer is, well, you don't just get it. And I'd love to kind of like pick your brain a little bit on how stratas get themselves into that situation.
Well, and, they have to become so
why they're getting into that situation.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the problem is that everybody thinks that the court-appointed administrator is this fantastic solution that you can just snap your fingers and get one, and that's not how it works. At least not in my experience. One, you have to be so broken that a judge agrees that you cannot function without someone else taking over. I have actually seen a judge tell a group of strata owners, no, go back to the drawing board and try again. Come back and see me in a year, and we'll talk about it at that point. So they really don't want to strip the Strata Corporation of its operating function, its ability to run itself, by handing over control to an administrator. And so to get to the administrator stage, you really have to work at proving that you cannot function without an administrator. It's not a simple solution. And then two, people don't understand the cost. They may think they have the money, but they don't. I tell people who call me about court-appointed administrator, I need to see, and I'd like to see a account with about $250,000 in it to get started. So if you don't have $250,000,
100 to 150,000. Now I got to quote 250,000. Nice,
yeah, right?
I love it.
So if you think we're going, it's going to be something simple and we're just going to make it happen, it doesn't work that way, because not only are you paying for the court-appointed administrator, you're also paying for the court-appointed administrator's lawyer to review everything the court-appointed administrator is doing. You're paying for lawyers on both sides of the argument, whatever the argument is, to represent those sides. And there may be more than two sides, so then you got even more lawyers getting involved, right? Plus the reports that may be necessary, and extra work and engineers and whatever else may be involved. The money is going to be spent. And with a court-appointed administrator, I still have to follow, as a court-appointed administrator, you still have to follow the how a strata council would operate, because I'm essentially operating in their stead. But if you don't go through with what my recommendations are, it is a heck of a lot easier for me to go to a judge and say, hey, these people need to do this thing and we need to spend their money. Just force the levy through so I can get this done and move forward with my task. And so there is no stalling. There is no other options. There is you've lost control of your asset to an individual who's a professional, right? And they'll listen to all the sides, but really at the end of the day, it's their prerogative as to how things move forward. And it's not cheap. And it's not easy.
You have to basically be such a bad position that you agree it's better to be powerless than to have democracy in your building.
Correct.
That's insane,
Correct.
Actually, if you say it. And that's where, we talk about on Friday the 13th, we talked about Grand Central. Big buildings that you're seeing in the news, that would be the ones that are coming to you to go to that. What are you finding are the generalized topics that are causing them to reach that point, like financial, like project maintenance, governance, relationships? Is it just everything?
It honestly, it's people get themselves into a position where they refuse to compromise on any level, and so what ends up, yes, they fight over parking, they fight over common property changes, they fight over repairs that need to be done. Those are the things that they are fighting over, but they're fighting over those things because they refuse to compromise on the solutions to get those things done. Both sides are locked in on a particular way to do something, and they're refusing to come to the middle and find something that works, right? And it devolves into more of a matter of principle fight than an actual, legal battle over something specific. It's always been that someone has their backup, and then the other side just doesn't want to apologize for whatever it was because they didn't think they did anything wrong. And so,
as funny as Phil Dugan describes a situation like that at a CRT case that went to the highest levels, and then when they were standing outside the case or outside to go into the tribunal, he said he turned to them and he's like, in case anyone has not said this, I'm really sorry. This is a really terrible circumstance, and our client just between us has been a total asshole. Language, but. And apparently this woman broke down crying because that's all she really wanted. And then they went into the tribunal and they actually resolved it fairly amicably at that point, because people's feelings matter.
Yep.
It's
They
really
can.
interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
I tell my staff all the time, like, if it wasn't for the people living in the strata corporations, I probably wouldn't need 3/4 of my staff. If all I had to do was run the buildings and not have to worry about the emotions and the people, it would be way easier to do what the strata is, because it's just following proper procedures for repair and maintenance of a building. You need something done, you do it, right? What happens is people get in the way of doing the things that need to be done.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so complicated, and that's what gives everybody a job at the brokerages, is because the people have made it complicated. The building is not complicated. There's nothing complicated about buildings. It's the people in it that are
I
complicated,
agree.
right?
Yeah, like I started out in rentals for the first 3 years, and I always liken to people that it was a really good experience starting out that way, because I got to do a full window replacement, a roof replacement, an electrical upgrade without any council dynamics. So I got to do it pure, just having the approval, going through the process, like that's it. And then so it allowed me to see what those processes will look like, but not fragmented. Moving into strata in my career, I have seen every kind of project, but never all the way through. And I got really excited at my last brokerage because I had told one of my vendors, I'm going to get to see a repiping from beginning to end. This has never happened. And then, of course, left that brokerage right before the end of construction. I was like, oh, so close, so close. Yeah, no, it's weird.
Yeah.
You touched on it a little bit about like people assuming smaller buildings are simple. But like at the unpacking multiplexes conference last week, the CMHC basically said it too in a matter of words, that like little, big or little, they take the same base paperwork, so we prefer not to do the little ones. I think that goes with strata, but also with the multiplex setup. They like a lot of it's just kind of like left. When you're picking up these smaller buildings, what are you seeing that's been like left undone or not set up properly that really stratas could look to level set at some point, or at any point, before they're getting to disputes?
Yeah, so the problem is that they never establish their operating procedures like a strata corporation should, right? A lot of the smaller stratas never meet and have council meetings. They never discuss their bylaws, which is their operating document. They never establish the policies and procedures around how they're going to govern themselves as a entity. And as a result, what ends up happening is well, it's chaos, right? And it works sometimes, right? As long as everybody kind of accepts the chaos. But eventually it'll fail. And then because you have nothing established, the strata corporation is kind of put in a really bad position, because there's nothing to rely on to say that what the person is doing that's causing a problem is an actual problem, right? And so what we find when we're taking over a lot of these stratas, whether they were managed before or not, is just a lack of thought put into the actual operating documents for the strata corporation, and contemplating, what is there for source documents to go back to for everybody to rely on as to how we're going to operate. So bylaws have never been updated. They're running on the schedule of standard bylaws, which is, it's great for a starting point, but it's not going to get you through the day. They haven't looked at their strata plans to make sure that they understand what's common property, what's limited common property, how they're supposed to operate this. There's no one in the strata that understands the difference between common, limited common property in the strata lot, let alone anything else. And the information that they did get sometimes is wrong, just flat out wrong. And so, like you said, they're training grounds, and so they get people who are being trained running their multi-million-dollar corporations, and it comes to us in a bit of a mess. And then luckily I have Celeste who fixes them, right? So that's kind of where we go. The team gets involved, but she's been around now doing this with me for 12 years plus, and that's her expertise, is just taking these new buildings and digging in on all of this stuff, right? And making it happen. So it's just following the processes, right? And getting them set up. And so we have a lot of, just documentation and checklists and so on and so forth that we go through with our clients to make sure that we've done all the things we're supposed to do to keep them, or get them to a point of operating correctly. So it's, I don't know, they usually operate fine. They're usually very nice people. They just want some help. They want someone to sort of sort things out for them,
They want
right?
someone to care about them, to be honest.
And that,
Like,
well,
we're
that,
in a really weirdly nurturing industry.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and the other problem we see is a lot of these sort of smaller stratas have commercial units at the bottom because they're residences over top of a couple of commercial units or a commercial unit, and there's obviously a differing need for both portions. They're not necessarily sectioned or typed in their bylaws, which means that there's additional sort of management issues that need to be addressed. But just resolving that operation as well, and making sure that the business owner understands that we're not trying to mess them around by making them responsible for a whole bunch of expenses that aren't theirs in their mind, and the residences don't feel like the commercial unit is just being a big bad business and not paying attention to them.
That's my beef with multiplex builders, is that they are really good at considering how to maximize the space and the units, but they're not really considering how people live on the property with each other. So like, for me, it's things like, okay, the littlest stuff, it's like pathway borders and garbage areas and how commercial and residential are going to interact and maintain properly differently. But they're not being given anything but the schedule of standard bylaws to do it with, which is a framework from 1998 for EV chargers or vapes or, like email was even as big back then, right?
Well, even collections of fees isn't properly done in there now, because the CRT has come back and said that you want to collect certain charges from an owner. It needs to be specifically stated in the bylaws that you can do so. So the bylaws, schedule of standard bylaws, are woefully insufficient for getting through the day. They'll get you started, but they're not going to keep you going. But yeah, these, we've had a couple developers come to us and actually ask for advice prior to construction, which has been really cool, that we've been involved at that level. They wanted our expertise on how buildings operate after they've sold all the units and moved on. So some of the developers are getting smart.
They are. You know what? There's a subset of the smaller to mid-sized developers that are of a more premium quality, that want to stand out and set the product that they are creating apart. And like, that was again the same thing at the Unpacking Multiplexes conferences. It didn't strike me as a group that wanted to just maximize like their hard line of their profits. Like, they genuinely in that room were like, okay, how can we think a little more thoughtfully and really like stand out as a group of developers? Like, that's one of my markets, as well as groundbreaking through consulting, is helping multiplex developers through that process and guiding them in the startup. And I really enjoy it because they have nothing. So they're usually so grateful at the advice that they just don't think of, because why would they? If they're not required through BC Housing or any of the other entities to learn about Strata, why of their own volition would they just wake up on Monday morning and be like, I think I'm going to learn all about the dynamics and legislation around Strata so that, I'm ahead of the game, even though I don't even know that I'm supposed to be looking at that, right? They're never going to do that, right? So, but you're right. There are the select ones that are like, come in, and they're going to stand out, right? In a market where there are thousands of unsold condos sitting around. These are not hot products right now. There will be condos and developers that continue to stand ahead of the rest based on the quality and the thoughtfulness. So
no, and it's been great. I've been seeing more and more of that. So that's been actually a very cool sort of evolution within the development world, and stratas. But it is building small stratas, like 5 units, 6 unit stratas, on single family home lots in Vancouver is like the hottest thing right now. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a bazillion of these tiny little stratas that no other brokerage wants. And I'm quite happy to take them. So
well, that was another question I wanted to dig into is like, hey, so wider level, what do you think that the introduction of technically tens of thousands of units across all the GVRD are going to be eligible under the rezoning that has happened in blanket municipalities? But in actuality, probably in the next 3 to 5 years, it's going to be thousands of units, not tens of thousands of units built, but that's still thousands of new stratas. So we're looking at like availability of labor and vendors and repairs, availability of strata licensees, and the capacity of the CRT. What are your thoughts on how this is going to be affected, Sean?
Well, other than the fact that it's the standard response of we're woefully understaffed as strata managers just generally, and there's a shortage of good strata managers out there. So that
Not
alone.
Obsidian or Advantage Property.
No, we still have capacity, and I'm constantly growing, and I constantly have room. But the issue is that as generally within the profession, there's far too few good strata managers, and I use the qualifier good strata managers out there, able to do the job, who actually care about what they're doing, are willing to come to the table, and not necessarily always say what the client wants to hear, but what the client needs to hear. Which can be, difficult when you're in the position that we are as agents. We have no say in how things go forward, but we certainly can at least argue our point that what they're maybe doing is not best practice. But like it's that volume is already way above where it should be right now. There's far too many strata corporations in relation to how many strata managers there are. Adding more volume to that is just going to make that problem worse. Statistics came out a few years ago about how the attrition of strata managers, and a large percentage of strata managers were at or beyond retirement age, and that the amount of strata managers coming into the profession is much less than it should be to keep up with that exodus that is occurring. It's going to make strata managers more in demand, which technically should cause our prices to go up, and never seems to do that. But
no, because then when they start to reach that point where they're in higher demand, they're like, well, now we can cut people and replace them with AI, and then we'll just take the profits instead.
I don't know how. Yeah,
I think that there is like a middle ground somewhere, but
no. This is a human job. We're dealing with humans on a human level in their space that is probably their most sacred space of all, which is your home. You can't.
I'm not against technology though, but use it to assist the strata managers at doing their jobs more effectively.
Make them more productive. Make them better at what they do.
Yes, more productivity. Yeah.
Right, but not replacement.
Give them back their time so that they can go and educate themselves, because that's the part is like, don't replace their time with more buildings. Replace it with empty space so that they can get ahead and that they can educate themselves professionally.
The mental health component too, right? It's huge for me as the mental health component with strata managers, and I know we're kind of diverting from the topic that you put me on, but the strata managers work essentially 24/7, 365 days a year, because we're on call when we're not at work. And if it's not even that we're not on call, like we're expected to be in the office somewhere between 8 and 10 a.m. and we will be running until 10, 11 o'clock at night, going to meetings or writing that set of minutes that we didn't get to during the day. They're not short hours, and the amount of time we have to decompress and deal with our mental health and make sure that we're recharging to a certain extent is like, it's precious time, right? So the more of that we can give to the strata managers, where we can get to a like regular working schedule to an extent, while being productive and getting through all the things we need to in a day while handling the volume that we have is critical, which I think is where AI is going to help us and get us there. It may also make us a little more polite when it comes to responding to people, because we tend to be short due to the shortage of time, right?
It gives us a little more clout to have those hard conversations, because certainly it's going to be easier for me to talk to some of my difficult clients about what's going on if I can pull an Eli report and say, look, it's not me. I'm not just telling you stuff that I'm imagining. this is comparing you against all these other properties in the median areas. And look, I'm pointing out this pattern that I have observed. Now you can see I'm not the only one seeing it.
Yeah. No. And those reports were fantastic, by the way. I was introduced to them last week, and I'm very interested. So,
You're obsessed now?
Yeah. But you know, the trick with all these buildings coming on board is just it is volume, right? But it needs to be scalable volume. So this idea that, you know, we're going to give each one of these buildings an all-you-can-eat buffet by giving them a fixed price service isn't going to work. That's where it's going to fall down, because you cannot put that many people in an all-you-can-eat buffet restaurant and expect to have anything left at the buffet.
Well, not if they've all been starving for a few years. If they're all well fed, that's different. But that's to say that they've all been fully serviced prior to that, and they probably haven't been.
For a while, right? But I've also noticed that over time, we've gone from having standard people coming into the all-you-can-eat buffet to everybody walking through the door as a sumo wrestler. And I mean that as politely as I possibly can.
And they want 5-star service.
Right? But the demand level is higher. The expectation of responses is immediate. The, you know, emails is like quadrupled or 10 times what it was like 10 years ago.
The brokerages said that during COVID it went up about 30% in email volume, and it never went back down again. And like when I told other managing brokers that number, they've agreed that it seems to make sense from their lived experience. So
well, I'm gonna sound like an old guy at this point, but back in the day when I was actually managing buildings, because I haven't managed a building since 2015 personally, it's been my staff, I've been managing them. I used to get out probably once every 2 weeks and go to each of my buildings and walk the building and make notes about everything that was going on at the building that I needed to address, and I would just bring it to council. I wouldn't hear from my councils between meetings, really. I would go to a meeting, they'd give me initiatives, I'd come back to the next meeting, I'd tell them what I'd done on those initiatives, and then get new initiatives. Now, my staff spend probably 80% of their time answering emails. And they have
I always have tips for owners. I think that there's sometimes this idea, well, our strata manager is supposed to be servicing me. And well, I need to get a garbage room key, or I need to do this. And it's like, okay, so yes, you do need that. And yes, the strata manager could give you access to this, but it's also like our responsibility as residents. Okay, so like, who do I know in this building? I need to get to know my neighbors so that if I lose my garbage room key, I can ask Bob, my neighbor, to borrow his and go get one cut, rather than like bother the strata manager with something that is so trivial and waste of their time. Because I know, given how much we pay per month, I don't want the strata manager to spend their precious hours on this particular thing. That would be a waste of my money along with everyone else's, right? And I think that there's some ways where those owners have to look at it as they're a little drop in the big bucket, and they can't expect the big bucket to pay attention to their little atomic needs all the time. That's a terrible example, but
no, it works. It works on a level, right? But the problem is they do need the attention. They do need things to get done. The problem is understanding who's responsible for what, and those expectations. Like your example of a garbage room key, in my opinion, is not a strata manager issue. That is a caretaker issue. The fact that the building may not have a caretaker means it becomes a strata council issue, not a strata manager issue, right? We're not on site. We're there to help with the administration of the building and to guide the council through the decisions that they need to make, so to make sure that they don't step on any legal land.
Put that in the Facebook group for the strata owners, 100%. I would say 90% will say that that's a strata manager issue. But I agree with you, it's not, right?
No.
So yeah.
No. There's different roles, right? There's different roles within a building, and those different roles need to be maintained. Like, caretakers are absolutely critical in buildings. A lot of buildings can't afford them. And I haven't yet found a part-time caretaker service that roams around from building to building. I've been looking for it for years. So, if you can't find a caretaker, then unfortunately the volunteers that volunteered for council need to figure out how they're going to do those duties, because it's not the strata managers, right? We try, we'll assist as best as we possibly can, but I'm going to tell you now, I serve clients from North Van to Chilliwack, and if one of my owners out in Chilliwack needs a key, they're driving to Surrey to get it because that's where my office is, right? I'm not driving out to Chilliwack. So it's, if they don't have someone on site, we can accommodate that as best as we possibly can, but it's going to be inconvenient because it's not the role that we play, right?
I totally agree. Yeah.
It's not the role we play. But just any example, whether it's an emergency because there's a leak coming in from the roof, or it's a garbage room key that happened to have been misplaced, like we need to be here. We need to take care of those things. What needs to be understood is that they are one in probably 800 units that we are taking care of, and that we are prioritizing all of the needs of those 800 units, not just their need. And so there needs to be patience. That's what needs to actually be taught. That the expectation is that unless it is literally, the roof is opened up and you have water pouring in, we're not diverting our attention to deal with your mailroom key. You'll have one probably by the end of the week, right? And that's just how it goes. I literally had, well, we could get into funny stories all day, but we had a gentleman who wanted something like that. He needed a fob. And so we're like, okay, well, the caretaker, they actually had a caretaker, will be on site at these hours. And he's like, no, I'm only available during these other hours that the caretaker is not there. Make sure it arrives at my door. And we're like, no, you make sure that you show up when the caretaker is there. And he's like, but I work during those hours. I'm like, well, I'm very sorry, but that's when the caretaker is going to be there if you want them to give you the fob.
Which is why we need to build community, honestly. That's what it's all about. Get to know your neighbors, people. I have to say, going from being in the city for years to now moving out to Chilliwack myself, I know more of my neighbors cumulatively in a month and a half than I have known in 5 years combined. So get to know them. It's helpful. It is nice. And then this is not a very graceful segue, but it is 420 today. So I wanted to end with talking a little bit about cannabis in stratas, because that's always a fun topic. There are well over 300 CRT cases related to smoke of various forms. And it is cannabis smoke is basically a case study in shared living, because people feel very strong one way or the other. It's an interesting one. I was just curious, do you have any stories or any interesting ones that have resulted from 420?
Not personally, no. Not with Obsidian. We haven't really seen that. In fact, we've been very fortunate with very few, nuisance complaints between units due to smoke. I think people have started figuring out how that stuff works. And honestly, the new products that have come out for cannabis is the ways of them getting it through vapes and other things has really reduced the amount of actual smell that makes it out towards, the other units. So I think that whole world has gotten better at doing what they do, right? And being less of a nuisance. Doesn't mean that I don't go down into the parkade here at the office every once in a while and smell it because someone was somewhere in the parkade. But it's part of communal living that you're going to smell things, whether it's cannabis or cooking smells or something else, because you're literally living on top of each other. So no, unfortunately I don't have any fun stories about cannabis and
I don't really either, because honestly they're usually fairly peaceful stories. The most contentious ones tended to be when the legalization was first happening, and there's a pushback against allowing dispensaries to be in the commercial lots of mixed buildings. And that became like quite a big issue for a little while, but honestly, that's kind of gone away now. We are seeing it a little bit more with other types of shops, though. So you're going to see that there's more bylaws where they're legally changed to include things like shroom dispensaries, and that will become the new thing that stratas are going after, because they're saying like, oh, you can't have that kind of shop because our insurance won't allow it. But it's going to be, I think it will be a similar thing to the legalization of cannabis and how that affected retail stores and usage in stratas. I didn't get you to pull anything ahead of time, Thomas, but I should have had you pull some stats on how many buildings have bylaws or things around this stuff.
I can get you some data on that. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that data and technology can do for you, and there's a lot that they can't. And as Sean has pointed out, this is a very human business. So data can help you come to certain conclusions, and we can get some great stats on that. I'll come back with you for something, Katharine. But I think that what Sean has touched on is quite interesting from a few perspectives. We didn't get into it, and maybe now's not the time, but sections and types are really interesting. The fact that you can have a different commercial and residential units in the same place without really accommodating for the differences between those is quite something. So that's something that would really affect that small and mid-sized community. The other thing that really stood out to me from Sean's discussion was how a lot of the communities that Obsidian gets are coming from managers. And, a lot of that would be, well, our management fees are too low in BC. I think they're too low across Canada, but they're much higher per unit in Ontario than they are here. And I think that the fees need to change. They need to go up. But because of the way that the market currently competes, more and more smaller communities, and they often have way more than your 20 units, Sean, but they aren't able to keep their existing management firm, or they're not getting the right level of service. So I'm sure you get a lot of referrals from other management companies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I have several firms that direct a lot of business to us. I get phone calls weekly because someone reached out to them, and they won't serve that size strata, right? And they know that I do, so they transfer the email or the phone call to me, and I try to assist them as best as I possibly can, right? But it does happen. Absolutely.
It's great that you have a model that will accommodate that, as you and both Katharine have said. There's a lot of new developments coming on that are going to be on the smaller side, and they need advice, they need expertise, and hopefully they come to you before they're at that deadlock and it has to get into that whole court-appointed status. If they can come to the point where they realize they need some of that advice early, that's the time to get it. It will be more cost effective for them, and you will hopefully be able to help diffuse some of those tensions that may build and escalate if they don't.
Yeah, and even if they have gotten to that point where they think they need an administrator, there's been a couple cases now where we have clients that came to us because their lawyer phoned us asking if I would be the administrator. I asked for some details as to what was going on, and I told them, I'm like, look, I think you'd be better off just to hire us as your strata management company, because I think your problem is operational. It's not governance, right? Like it's a matter of leading them through the problems that are occurring versus me like having to force the issue through the courts. And the cost savings has been astronomical for those stratas, right? It's getting a good manager that actually can lead you where you need to go sometimes is all you need. And
they have to want to meet you there too, because I've taken on self-managed consulting clients, and I don't do the same thing you guys do because I don't handle any of the contracts or the money and stuff like that. Like if you want that, you have to go to Obsidian or a full service brokerage. But I'll tell them straight up when they come to me in the initial discovery meetings, and I'm like, wow, like everything that you're going through, I can help you with, but I don't think you're ready to work with each other yet. So, when you get to that place, come back to me, and I'm dying to dig into this. And, usually either weeks or months later, I've seen those clients come back because they're like, yeah, we're ready. We get it now because this other thing also now happened and made things even worse. And it's exactly the thing that you told us in the meeting was going to happen. So I love being right, but not like in an I told you so way, just like in a validation way.
This has been fun for me because I've gotten to do much more of the listening, and I always seem to talk too much, but
That's
it's been
not
fantastic.
True at all with us.
We'll have to do
I always, I'm all over it. But yes, no, we should probably wrap things up now.
No, absolutely. It's been fun. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both very much. Sean, great to have you on. Great to learn more about Obsidian and what you're doing to help these communities. Strata Unscripted will return. Katharine, anything as we sign off?
Nope, that's it. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll have Celeste on here too next time. So
thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Awkward that last little bit, but good. Well done.
Okay. Yeah, that was good. You know what? I didn't need to bring in the 420 stuff, actually. It kind of took away from it, to be honest.